It's like
But don't
nothing
worry.
like straight to the.
Yeah, does this work better?
Yeah. Nice,
Okay.
nice. Very nice. Ok, well, gracias a todos por acompañarnos en otro conversatorio de Conversando con CISOs. Mi nombre es Edgar Rojas. Tenemos obviamente a mi colega en Bogotá con su ruanita habitual, a Andrés Almanza. Y tenemos una invitada especial. Don't worry, Andrea, we're going to switch to English. Una invitada especial, la doctora Andrea Little Limbago, una especialista. Ella es la persona a la cual yo tengo preguntas en el tema de privacidad o el tema de lo que está sucediendo a nivel internacional político. Ella es. Yo voy a ella y le digo, Andrea, ¿tú qué opinas que está pasando? Y me envía por ahí unos 20 enlaces. Yo creo que la respuesta a tu pregunta está aquí. Cuando le digo una pregunta acerca de cómo crees que está sucediendo con China después del COVID y todo esto que va a suceder con el mundo, y me envía una base de datos impresionante. Antes de comenzar, agradeciendo a toda la asistencia, Andrés, creo que estamos teniendo nuestra respuesta a cómo afecta la asistencia si nos vamos en puro inglés.
Sí, claro. Sí.
Sí, vemos que está afectando, pero bueno, ya sabemos, es una prueba que queríamos hacer. La invitación a todos, me muevo aquí rapidito. El CISO Summit, diciembre 2 y 3, así me hago así ya. Para que nos acompañen, va a ser un evento muy, muy bueno en español, virtual, mesas redondas con CISOs. 15 CISOs nada más, Andrés, por mesa, para que sea más interactivo el asunto. ¿Qué opinas acerca de eso?
No, pues me parece muy bien y también darles a todos la bienvenida. Buenas tardes a los que nos acompañan hoy. Digamos que hoy vamos a probar, como decimos, un experimento. Vamos a tener un experimento, vamos a hablar con Andrea y pues para los que nos van a escuchar, pues ella obviamente va a hablar en inglés y nosotros pasaremos para algunos la conversación al español, algunos tópicos o algunos puntos que sean importantes. Y si no tienen ningún problema y quieren conversar en inglés, pues
seguimos.
Bienvenidos.
Bienvenido, ¿sí? Exacto. Cualquier pregunta, por favor, por el chat o Q&A. Y, all right, comencemos. Andrea, thank you so much for being here with us. Welcome to Conversando con CISOs, speaking with CISOs. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
That's great. And you're at Baltimore, Virginia. Where is it?
Northern Virginia.
Northern Virginia.
Just outside DC.
Nice. So it's fantastic. So what happened, Andrea, is we have this weekly event here with CISOs from all over Latin America. And one of them last week sent me a message, an email saying, hey, Ed, can you guys have topic about privacy and human rights? And as I said before, anytime that I hear the words privacy, immediately I'm like, Andrea. and especially human rights, Andrea. Political, Andrea. So that's why I reached out to you, because the other question that we asked was, do you mind, the attendees, if we can do this in English? And the answer was yes, go ahead and do it in English. So
I appreciate you doing that for me. My Spanish is not, you can't interpret it. It's very stale, I would say.
Okay.
Better.
All right. Well, we'll try our best here, because I mean, this is an extremely interesting topic. I did a lot of research on this, and I was very surprised. First of all, when you do research about privacy and human rights, and my research goes as far as, in Google, privacy and human rights, and all of a sudden everything is linked to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And then when you go to the UN, to the links there, and it says 75 years, 78 years, or 72 years, because this was written in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, specifically Article 12, states that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Again, this was written in 1948. Digitalization was not a thing then. But this is an issue that is now front and center. Have they updated the United Declarations of Human Rights, Article 12? Is it being proposed to be updated? How are first of all, nation states, and second, how are companies abiding by this human rights Article 12 in privacy?
Yeah, so that, I mean, there are a lot of questions right in there, and there's so many different directions that we could take that. The one thing to keep in mind is, so that this Declaration of Human Rights is very similar to almost every other global institution that we're seeing right now that was created right after World War II. And so, and all of them are in the process of trying to figure out how to be relevant and how they impact the world today. And so the UN is dealing with that issue, and also with the geopolitical shifts. So is the IMF, the World Trade Organization. And so it's not a surprise that we basically have here a better part of 75 years lived under these kind of rules that are generally been norms, right? So they're not obligatory to follow them, but if you don't, then there are consequences, especially among reputational risks and so forth. But a lot of them really, and besides some tweaking here and there, have not been greatly updated. And so when it comes to the Declaration of Human Rights, there have been comments that have come out from the UN basically saying the rights that you have in the offline, in the physical world, do apply online. And so they have come out and basically said digital rights are human rights.
Okay.
And so, but again, it's non-binding. And so,
right.
But which doesn't mean that it's not useful or helpful. And so I think very often, sort of the pessimistic approach is that, well, why are they even talking about that if none of it's binding? Well, because it does set the bar as far as what appropriate behavior should be.
Okay.
And what respectful countries in the world and good, good partners and interactive countries in the world do to be good members of the global community. How should they behave? And so the UN does provide that bar so that when countries do veer from that, it does send a signal. So it is important, but just not binding.
Okay. So there's an organization called Future of Privacy Forum. Mm-hmm. And Jules Polonetsky is the CEO. She stated, and this is where obviously this is the reason why we're talking about privacy and human rights right now, right? She said, I think we saw some people thinking that technology would solve the problem. And the problem she's referring to is COVID-19 and all this stuff. And the Silicon Valley was going to invent solutions. This isn't about technology. This is about communicating with the public. Now that we had a little bit more of experience, because again, you start from zero, right? Nobody knew anything about this until the whole idea was, let's do the contact application so that we know who has COVID and so we can control it. And that was the idea number one, but then nobody thought about the privacy issues. So she said, now that we had that experience, now we need to go back and see a more careful process. And she says the leading platforms are supporting apps that don't require location data. That means the new ones, right? The new applications no longer require location data. By using cryptography, by using Bluetooth to detect other devices, I think that we've settled in large part on the system where people who download these apps can be comfortable that they're going to get an alert, which is what they downloaded them for, and know that they were in a proximity to somebody else. But it took a while to get there. And there are some lessons from some of those snafus. So the first question I have is, fine, so you're no longer collecting that, but what happens to the data that you already collected? And how's that being used?
Right. And so a lot of good points in that. And so one, trust becomes an issue. I think trust becomes something that underlies all of this. And so one gets into what are they doing with the data that's already been collected? Two, so we know of these solutions that seem to be working fairly well. On the contact tracing, Apple and Google did partner with what majority privacy specialists believe is the best case scenario for preserving the privacy of the data. Mm-hmm. Not all the contact tracing apps use those though, so just keep that in mind. And there's enormous differences across the globe on what is being done with those contact tracing apps. And that gets into a little bit of the geopolitics, right? So
exactly.
There are some countries of the world where the contact tracing apps are mandatory. You have to download them and they do collect your data. And so that's sort of on the one extreme, right? Yeah. And then the other extreme is more what you're seeing in some of the European countries where, and then even actually Virginia was one of the first in the US to do the Apple Google version of the contact tracing app. And so you do see significant variations. So just because there's a solution out there for that, it seems to be the best solution to date and does help with the privacy component of the contact tracing data, it doesn't mean that's universally applied.
Right.
And you do also get the issue of, whoever, if they say that they're using it, are they really? And so there are a lot of steps that the tech community writ large, you still has a bit of, reputational damage control to be working on, right?
Right. Because everyone's still talking about what was the UK company with the Facebook thing.
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge.
Everyone's still thinking privacy, digital privacy, Cambridge.
Cambridge Analytica.
No, I mean that's right, and they're in the news again now.
What happened to them now?
Now they are linked to doing basically creating lists to deter certain underrepresented groups from voting in the United States.
Oh my God, this is
which is a human right.
A human right, yeah, human right to vote. Yeah, I mean that's an inalienable right for any citizen of any country. So let's talk about that, the information being gathered. So, and it escapes me the name of the country that was just elected. Was it Belarus? Where what was the name of the?
Well, Belarus, yeah, where the protests and the internet blackouts.
Exactly, exactly. Yes. So it doesn't take a very smart person to think. It's like, how are they getting all this data for all those people that are all the public, all the citizens? They have had to have all this data before. And how did the government get all this data and be able to do what they did, suppress the vote, suppress whatever it is that they did there to hold on to power? I mean, that's, again, we're going back to what you just said about the US, that suppression of vote, that is suppressing human rights.
Right.
I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, Andres, do you want to chime in, or should I go with it? Should I answer?
You're our guest.
Okay.
Andres will be asking questions.
Okay.
Yes.
I just don't want to be dominating. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so that's what gets into, we've had these social networks, and that's where a lot of it is you have been fairly open for so long. And for really close, moving on to 2 decades, for at least the first decade and a half, there wasn't a ton of concern about what happened to the data or what you were providing. And it really has been in the last 5 years where there's been growing interest among the public. I'd say in the tech community, the privacy community has been talking about this for a while, but it's honestly it didn't reach the sort of the public awareness as it has reached now. I mean, if you look at even Netflix, their documentary on it, right? Which has very mixed reviews from more of a security and privacy specialist, but people are talking about it now, and so it's one of those things where for someone that's in the community where we've been yelling about this going on, the data that's been collected, it took a documentary for people to be like, oh, that's what's going on.
Yeah, thank you for explaining it to us, how it interferes.
Yeah, and so I think that that's exactly how the governments are getting a lot of the data, and then they have their own internets in many cases that they can control the data flowing in and out of their countries, and there's more movement going towards that. And so there are a variety of technical means that they're using to basically control the data going in and out within their country, on top of the various kinds of cyber attacks going on to exfiltrate data from either from social networks, from companies. I mean, it's been sort of the data exfiltration has just been going on at significant rates. And then there's also so much of that data on social media has just been widely available. And so you see companies popping up that basically are just scraping what's already, currently none of it's illegal. They're scraping every data, all data that's publicly available, and pulling together networks of data. So,
and that was only my comment. The genie is already out of the bottle. I mean, it's been out of the bottle a long, long time ago. And as we keep saying all the time, everything that you post on the internet will always be on the internet. You cannot remove it, you cannot delete it. It's always going to be there, as you said, scraping. And it also goes back to what this lady was saying in the quote that I gave, she said it has to be communicating with the public. Also has to be the choice of word. When we say scraping, we know what we mean as an industry, right? But when you if I tell that to my wife, wow, they're scraping our information, she's going to think it's just a little thing, right? You see what I'm saying, right?
No,
Because
no, you're 100% right, and that's we really struggle with communication as an industry, but again, I think that's changing. And actually, a really great example of that is just reading today, Rachel Toback, who does a lot of social engineering, she did so Marie Claire, basically a woman's magazine in the U.S., always has a quiz on the back that kind of is like a yes, no, yes, no. Rachel helped them make one for is your data secure?
Oh.
And so that's in Marie Claire now. And so like that's such a good example of good communication to where the audience is. So instead of having them come to Black Hat and listening to our Black Hat talks, put it where they already are and make it in a way. And it's a really great, like it's a decision tree that is your data secure? Do you have a password? Yes or no? Do you use multi-factor or authentication? Yes. Like it's just a really human level means to get people to read it and both interact with it and then to understand what they need to do. So it's not just saying you're stupid because you don't have X, Y, and Z, which we say that a lot as an industry.
Oh yes.
No one here, I think we're all trying to change that, but that as an industry tends to be what we say. So it's just a really good example of the communication and how we can all do better to help people, raise, elevate, and understand what data they're putting out there. Because at the end of the day, so privacy also becomes an option, right? So you as part of the digital rights, you should be able to choose what you put out there. And if you do want to put something out there, understanding what the risks and the benefits might be, that should be on each one of us. Probably have different, risk profiles and comfort levels. And so that's on us, but we need to have the ability to understand what it means so we can make informed decisions.
Exactly. And I know, again, this issue with privacy, and Andres, we've been talking about this for a while. This issue of privacy has been on the forefront within the cybersecurity community for more than 10 years. We keep talking about, EFF keeps coming right all the time, and you are there, you're writing policies, privacy policies for the government and stuff like that. And you go back to the US Congress where they're having all these things about, they're going to stop our rights, and it's all this, older white gentlemen, congressmen that have no idea anything about, but now they're making the decisions, right? And then you have the government, the corporations coming and saying, you should step in, you should know, because this is going to affect you this way, and they make it sound so negative, and everything is so doomsday that at the end of the day, people, I'm in the industry, I'm like, I'm not going to listen to that anymore. Nothing's gonna be done. What do we have now? We have a mess. In part of the research that I was doing, we have a mess. They're calling it the alphabet soup of privacy policies in the states, right? Because every state, what do they call it? The zip code policies or something like that. Depending on the zip code that you're in, you have a different privacy policy assigned to you.
Well, and some of them don't even have privacy policies, and so it varies dramatically. The one area where every state now has something is the data breach notification laws. But we have 54 different data breach notification laws. So the privacy is starting to pop up with California's law. So
let me just say that in Spanish so that, make sure that we don't misunderstand this. En Estados Unidos, que todos lo miramos de Estados Unidos, no hay un solo política de privacidad. Hay estados que no tienen políticas de privacidad. Y hay más de 54 diferentes políticas de ciberseguridad. Si Estados Unidos está en esa situación, ¿cómo estarán nuestros países? Es impresionante. I just saying, that so many, and if that's the state the United States is in, how is the rest of Latin America countries? In what state are they in? I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but since you're geopolitical, do you have any idea? I know that you did this research when you came to Cartagena last year.
That's right. Right.
In Latin America, privacy, Latin America, how is it?
Yeah, and so I think again it's very different. Brazil just put into effect their sort of GDPR version of data protection, and so I think that's a very big deal. The implementation was delayed for a while, but it has it was mirrored off of GDPR. There are some differences, but it falls much more so along the realm of individual data protection versus government controlling data, and so I think that is good. Another interesting case is in Ecuador when they had the major breach. A little over a year ago now. A little over a year ago. Yeah. Time
we discussed
means
it here.
something different. Yeah. When they had their data breach, Ecuador for quite some time and still has a lot of their technology and surveillance technology coming from some of the Chinese companies. And so lots of data protection and surveillance, or data surveillance coming in. And once the big data breach happened, though, there's a big switch in public awareness and in government responsiveness to try and push through a data privacy law. And so there are these conflicts going on, in democracies as well as authoritarian regimes. Not much of a discussion, but in democracies for sure. How do you balance what the government can collect for national security versus the data privacy rights? And I always argue that you can have both. I think it's it's a lazy way to think about it if you think you only have one or the other. I think that puts us down a very dangerous road. But I think that case of Ecuador is just such a good example of how you do see, almost seeing it playing out in real time, of that conflict between the two. And so there are some differences along there, but it's interesting seeing more countries starting to pop along and try and mirror their GDPR, because it really is the most prominent global data protection policy that's out there. Again, the U.S. has done nothing. So it's, the leadership where the U.S. the areas where the U.S. used to provide that leadership, we're just not, or in more short, we're backing away, which is empowering a lot of the authoritarians out there to see how far they can go, and we're seeing some instability arise because of that.
And I will come back with that question: why is the U.S. backing away? Is there a reason? But before we go that, why is the U.S. backing away? No, because I have a really good question here in the chat from Raul Lescano. He said, will it be possible to see at a very high level a map between GDPR philosophy versus USA rights, like CCPA, GLBA, and others, and maybe Latin American countries' privacy laws? Is there such a thing already? Has someone created that?
There are some. I don't know if it's all in one spot. I actually don't think it is, but the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IAPP, I've seen numerous ones where they have tables that say the CCPA and the GDPR, and then Brazil's law and the European law. And so I don't.
Is that the one that we discussed here a while ago, Andres, where he showed in one of our programs which countries were inflicting more on human rights?
But it's not the same. Let's say that in that moment was country have a privacy law maybe, or that in Latin America and Caribbean and Central America we have. But it's not in all our countries that I say that we are learning about privacy, put in front. I love this word that Andrea say, balance. I think that we are learning to balance privacy with business, with human rights, because in this moment, I think that all this is a mess, because it's a mess. Yes, it's totally, not all people, governance and organization know what is privacy at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, privacy. What is privacy? This is a right. Okay, what is this? That you don't let my data out of your enterprise. Okay, nice. But what happened if you put what happened if this is privacy? This is not privacy.
All of a sudden it's no longer there. So before I go back to that question, the follow-up question there, Andrea, when Andres is talking, it brought me something to mind. In Latin America, there's a big familiarity, right? We all have, we're from Latin America, we all lived with issues with human rights, right? In the 60s, in the 70s, even in the 80s, and in the 90s in Colombia, in the 90s was freaking huge. So we've experienced what human rights and what, it actually means physically, right? In the US, maybe not that much. So will it be, is that let's say certain groups have not experienced that much. Let me just say it that way. I saw your face. I'm like, let me rephrase that. You think that's the reason why the U.S. is lagging and not putting a lot of emphasis into privacy?
No, I don't think that's the reason. I think, I think there are a handful of reasons. I think one is just that we've got such deadlock in our Congress. And so that's one component of it.
One is very political. So
yeah.
if this one wants it, then we don't want it. It's not for the best of the country. So okay, so polarize.
I think that's one very big issue. But the way that laws can change is if the public pushes for a lot of that change. And so until the last couple of years, the U.S. public didn't care a ton about regulating the various aspects of the internet. And so while they would say they care about privacy when it came to should there be a federal privacy data protection law, there wasn't a ton of support for that. And so for the government to make to enact change, there does need to be that momentum from the people. But that's shifted. But so those polls have shifted a lot.
Why have
really
they shifted? I mean,
for us.
Again, you research this. Everybody else, we live in the bubble, so we don't see all this. What has shifted that from the U.S. public?
It's greater awareness. So I think it's a couple of different things. So in the background, so the cyber attacks and the data breaches have always been for the last 10 to 20 years. We've slowly heard more and more about the data breaches, and so those keep getting those occur in more frequency. They're in headlines. There are, our school system had a ransomware attack. I mean, so it becomes personal for the data. And so there's a personalized element of it because of all these different cyber attacks, coupled with all the different, the various scandals really from the big tech and what they're doing with the data. Okay. And so it's the cyber breaches and that constant momentum, of data scandals, and even more so like how the companies have been handling them. And so I'm sure we all can remember, a couple of years ago, where pick your tech giant would say, "Oh, but we don't do that," and then a few months later they would say, "That's not really what I meant. We do that, but we don't do it anymore." And so because of that, this lack of trust, the tech flash is what it also is coined as the lack of trust in big tech companies to protect the data. Before, it was sort of assumed that they were protecting your data and not doing anything, with it that you didn't really care, that you cared about. And so that has all switched. Okay. And then I would say, on top of that, as far as some of the momentum, GDPR has pushed, for those, almost at the state level, and for businesses especially, figuring out how to be compliant with GDPR and realizing that if they also have European Union citizen data, they have to be compliant. I think that has helped to raise their awareness so that they will not be pushing back quite as much. And so that's also what you saw was big tech not wanting to be regulated. And we saw a big switch from, saying, self-regulation is fine. We got this covered to, we probably need a little bit of regulation. And I think part of that was to try and gain better trust. I'd love to think it's a little bit of self-awareness that the government should be stepping in on some of that. Okay. But then also because they already had to deal with the GDPR, it kind of, the cost of them having to be compliant shifted. And so now with them seeing that the popular sentiment has shifted, they basically either have the government produce some sort of data protection policy that is absent their feedback, or they can help shape it. And so you're seeing the tech companies now trying to shape it a bit more. So absent all those things was initially why the U.S. never put any leadership. And now there's been a bigger push. The issue that we don't, where we still stand though, is that there's deadlock at the federal level. And that's why all of those different state level policies that you talked about earlier, why those are all popping up, is because at the state level, the people want data protection and they want privacy. Yeah. And so because the federal government's not doing anything, the states are stepping in.
So I love that you said greater awareness, communication. Some of the platforms out there, right, they're starting to use more and more privacy. We'll talk about Apple in a second. Mm-hmm. But Salesforce, for example, have put out privacy principles that are very specific to this time of COVID. Some of those are really common sense statements, right? Things like, we try not to collect personal identifying information, right? Be thoughtful about how you minimize the amount of data that you collect. Put time limits on how long you keep it, because that's answering, what are you collecting, why, and how long are you keeping that for? Right? And it says here, but a big part of that is transparency. It means telling people, and this is where the communication, the awareness is coming, telling people that their data is being collected, why it's being collected, how it's going to be used, and then to stick to what you say.
It's also easy, right?
Yeah, it's very easy. And that goes with what Andres likes to say, right? When we talk about privacy, is the use of the information, right? That's a big differentiator, is how you use it.
The issue with privacy is the use, not the access. And I say, yeah, I believe in this all the time. But I have a question, because when I listen to Andrea very carefully, I say, it's really a problem that I collect the data. This is the problem, collect privacy or maybe sensible information about whatever, or maybe is another thing. Because many people say, okay, the problem is that you collect my privacy information, my name, but is this the really the problem?
So I think it depends a lot, because the collection is one component of it. And so I think, again, I think it's almost like a decision tree. Because if they're it used to be, that the more data, the better. And that's when big data first started to emerge, is let's collect as much data as possible. I don't think we need it right now, but who knows what we'll need it for in 5 years. And so we're just going to collect it's like vacuuming up as much data about people as possible. And that really was the predominant model. There is, I think, collection itself could be fine, assuming that there is a data protections in place for it. Because even if you don't intend to use it for third-party sharing or for various kinds of data mining on sort of the psychometrics for trying to influence people and so forth, and obviously that's what underlines a lot of marketing and advertising. So there are some new regulations coming along there. But even if you don't intend for that data to be used or accessed, you still have the issue of how do you protect it from cyber attacks.
Yes.
And so it's still, and so if you didn't collect it in the first place, you wouldn't have to worry about it as much if it gets exposed to a cyber attack. And so it is, again, it's that balance.
It's one or the other, yeah.
But I say that this is a circle. Like you have to, because all business are digital today, have to.
Yes, absolutely.
And the future is worse than today.
Exactly.
And have to.
Yep.
This is the reality. That I say that they be aware to protect in the best way and inform and aware people to say, and I protect this information. And I, for example, Apple, that I say, now I want to fight to protect your information. Okay. At least I put my hand and I say, I protect your information. This is at least one thing important for people. Mm-hmm. It's true. Maybe we don't know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's exactly right. And what we're starting to see really over the last year, where these tech companies, have all launched various, basically advertising campaigns that try and show themselves as the privacy company. But the other guys aren't the ones following the, aren't the ones, highlighting privacy as much as they are. And there are examples, Facebook, Zuckerberg wrote long memo, basically saying how they're the ones that they care about privacy, that they're not going to go work and they're not going to be prominent in countries that don't respect human rights and digital rights. And so they were able to say that, and that was for them. That was sort of a ding on Apple, who does have a very big footprint in China, for instance, and has handed over encryption keys to China.
Yes,
yes. And so they each try and take the angle that fits for them. And so for Apple, though, Apple does do. They have so far proven to be much more protective of your data and not, without the third-party data sharing scandals and so forth. And so, and when Apple comes out with their human rights component, that very much still, it's good advertising and marketing for them, because that's it's what the people want to see. So it's good for business. So you have to have that motive. But I think it, again, is also to help differentiate themselves from some of the other big tech companies. And again, it's almost Apple and Facebook present very different views, because if you look at, Facebook is under attack yet again for what they're doing or not doing as far as helping promote unrest on their platforms in Ethiopia and in other countries around the world. Very similar to what we saw in Myanmar, without doing much. And so, Apple can say, well, we've got your data. We're not sharing it with these different, with these third parties. We try and we address it when we hear any kind of concerns. We prevent the government from coming in and taking the data. And so, they each take their own perspective on it that helps highlight how they're doing it better than other companies. And Microsoft is another one. It's not just those two. Microsoft has come out, Brad Smith has come out in favor of digital rights as a human right.
Yep.
So I think all that's a good trend. I think that's
great, really good.
Where they're actually acknowledging it. And so Whereas really a couple of years ago, those executives said, well, I don't believe that our platforms have any impact on election outcomes or human behavior or any kinds of conflicts. Now there's acknowledgement that it does and that they can actually help shape and promote digital rights. And so I think that's a really nice evolution.
And it's interesting because I'm reading this article from September 4 about Apple's human rights, how they came up with the publication of a human rights policy, which is interesting. And again, Andres was telling me before some of the questions that the iPhone offers, and we'll discuss that in a second. But I'm looking here, and I lost the location where it said that the reason why Apple was forced to do this is because 40.6% of the shareholders forced Apple to do this.
Yeah. Which is amazing, right?
Yes, of course, that I say this is a signal that Apple understands that privacy is a human right, or maybe is a strategy to have a better position in the market. Because when you say this, you say, okay, this is really because they understand this, or maybe because they have to be a better position in the market.
Yeah, and I think, I honestly imagine it's probably both. I think if it didn't help, if it didn't help, again, I'm cynical on this. If it didn't help them in their market, they probably wouldn't have. But at the same time, it's interesting. There's been a lot of surveys lately on environmental and social governance and compliance for that on companies. And so as one of the big risks for the companies, how they're adhering to various kinds of social laws, whether they're destroying the environment with climate change, whether they're doing these, net zero, for instance, policies. Human rights falls, under that umbrella of environmental and social governance that is becoming more and more prominent for why customers or how customers are choosing the companies that they work with. And so that's where I think you also get the market component to it. But then I would also add that because at some point, there are, across the globe, more and more countries are adopting GDPR-like, I'd say more democracies are doing that for the data protection. They do see these regulations coming, and so in the U.S., it's either they can help shape it and help inform what those protection policies will be and how they'll address human rights issues, or the government, or they can be shaped by the government. So I think they want to have a say in what they feel is likely coming down the road from the government. And so I think that, again, there's a variety of forces that go along with that. Getting back to with Apple and some of their communication, one thing that I think is great, so on the privacy side, we always hear that people say, well, I've got nothing to hide, so what's it really matter? And Apple has a commercial recently that's come out that basically someone's on on a bus basically saying my credit card number is and saying it out loud, and then they're out walking in a park saying my heart rate is X, and following along, and it's basically people yelling out all this private information that they probably don't want everyone to know. And so just it highlights exactly, you may think you have nothing to hide, but you don't want people knowing exactly your birth date, your social security number, your healthcare information, like all these kind of things. And so just they communicated it really well. And so Apple is clearly making a big push right now to get at to be the leader on the privacy side, communicating it well, and then putting out these human rights components.
Interesting. Well, here's a statement that I read, and this bothers me a little bit because the way that I see it, we're heading into the big brother stuff. Protecting human rights by respecting data privacy and freedom of expression has become a material risk for both investors and companies. So companies and investors already see that human rights and freedom of expression can be turned into, can become financial, monetary stuff, right? That to me is scary.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, all that data can be monetized, right? That's how it's the monetization of data, which is the big concern.
Which means, going back to the first question, what data do we collect? Well, we don't know if it has value now, but it's going to be gold didn't, whatever, oil wasn't, existing all the time, and it wasn't valuable before. Look how valuable it is now. So let's collect all the data. That's why I'm saying that it makes me more scared now reading that statement because it's like, oh crap.
But scared or maybe aware?
Scared because if I'm aware, which I am right now, I cannot stop it. What is my only choice to stop all that information? Disconnect from the internet, don't use cell phone, don't use smartphones.
But you can live with this?
No.
Okay.
It's impossible. So you have to give something. That's what I'm saying, right? With that all of a sudden my privacy, it becomes somebody else's, financial, railroad from the 1800s. How all these people are becoming really, really wealthy based on my information. Why am I getting wealthy?
Well, I mean, so proposals have been put out to pay people for their data, but I think that's a really bad idea because it basically means that only very wealthy people would be able to afford privacy, right? So it would create a very big caste system for who can maintain privacy and who can't.
That's a new type of insurance in the future. Privacy insurance. Oh my God, do we need more insurance?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's going to get rolled under cybersecurity insurance, right?
Where do you really think this is heading, Andrea, after COVID-19? We're probably going to get COVID-20. I mean, is this just the tip of the iceberg?
For the data collection?
Yeah.
Or,
both data collection and privacy stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, what else can they collect from us?
Well, I mean, here's, on one hand, some of this data does get stale relatively quickly, depending on on what it is. But people do evolve and change over time on that. I think it is a very good trend that we're starting to be able to turn off the geolocation data. Although, again, not everyone knows how to do that or where to find it. And then, again, there are other ways to get at the geolocation. So there's plenty of work to be done in that area. But I do think, the way I look at it right now is we for so long we've seen that the foundation of the internet was to move toward free and open and secure internet for fair exchange of information and ideas, and that was sort of the vision of it all. And clearly that vision has come under attack significantly, and if not proved very, very naive to the notion that borders don't exist on the internet, because clearly they do. And so I think those borders existing on the internet are going to become more and more prominent. And so where in international relations, it's where you stand depends on where you sit. And I kind of tweet that so where you stand depends on where your data sits, because it's going to be where you are across the globe. You're going to have very different privacy and very different internet experiences than than your neighboring country. And so while it's been fragmented a little bit, I think we're going into even more fragmentation. And so you'll see some that are following GDPR or whatever. Ideally, GDPR also is not the end all, right? Like it still needs to evolve and help address numerous issues, but hopefully it'll continue to do so to protect individual rights. And other countries will be following along, within that realm to protect data. But there's a whole different movement as well for governments who are trying to access as much data as possible and control that data. And so you're gonna have areas, and we already have areas where there's minimal to no privacy online. When you think about like the Great Firewall in China, Cambodia just came out saying that they're going to try to create the same thing.
Wow.
Their own version of it. Russia's already tried to do, has passed legislation that they'd have their own, single silo of data going into the country. And so privacy will mean very different things, and the ability to maintain privacy and data protection, that experience is going to be very, very different depending on where you are across the globe. And honestly, for us in the U.S., I get very worried about where we currently are headed. I'm not sure which path we're going to be taking. I really hope people, take a stand and vote for more of the democratic and data protection and privacy and just basically everything that can fall under the democratic norms. That is my hope, and my hope is that the technology companies see how it's also a good business model, not just not just the right thing to do. And so I hope, again, I know hope's not a strategy, but that's kind of, I'll do what I can to help make it seem like it's in the best interest so that we can maintain and actually improve upon privacy and data protection. Because I do think that there's a way. Like on the one hand, I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed with thinking that we're just going into a big brother surveillance state. We see a lot of that surveillance technology that's out there. We see it being adopted at local levels, across the globe. But there is this pushback, and the population does have a vote, and so and have our voices heard. And so I do think there's also equal momentum for more of those data protections, and we'll see. And what's interesting to see is that democracies are starting to form technology alliances that focus on trusted data within them. And I think that is a really, really good trend that we're starting to see over the last year. It's something actually, in Eddie, a year ago, I probably wouldn't have talked about that at all. It's something that continues, but it's gained momentum over the last year. And it's everything from, a 5G technology alliance to, not allowing certain products within your technology stack. And then even from there, once you have the notion of creating trusted networks gets at both the partnerships and as well as the technology. But even on the technology side, there's more interest now in creating the technologies that even if there is somewhere within the system an untrusted technology, there's still ways to protect the data within it through technological means. And so, 15, 20 years ago, there was the quote that the brightest minds of my generation are trying to get people to click on ads, right? And I think that probably was true, and so that's part of the problem. Yeah. There's a lot of emphasis right now in the tech community to try and do tech for good. And so I think we'll see some more technological solutions where it really wasn't a focus before. Yeah. So we'll see.
Well, so Andres, you were telling me on your iPhone you started to do
yes, that stuff. I say that Apple today that I have the last grade, and all the apps ask me if I want to access what kind of data or what kind of. I say, okay, this is good. This is good because other.
It gives you the control. Yeah.
Yes, and this is kind of control. Yeah, and with this, you say, okay, WhatsApp have access to this folder, and I say, okay, nice.
Good. Yeah, and it made it usable, right? You didn't have to read through a 50-page legal document to figure out what they're doing. Yeah, and it gave you the power to say yes or no in a way that was right there. You didn't have to go. Not only did you not have to read a 50-page legal document or 100-page or however, they all are super long, but you also didn't have to dig deep into the settings to figure out how to turn something off.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think, so the usability, and again, it's like the human level of it, and that's huge. Like I think, and it's really disrupted the app industry by doing that. And so,
and this is the second time that we hear, and Andres, we hear the word usability.
Usability, yes.
In privacy. So we had the Tactical Edge Latin event last week, Andrea, and we had this professional lawyer from Cali, from Colombia, talking about privacy, and she said that the need to design a privacy program, and I said that is the first time in my life I hear the word design and privacy, because you never hear of that, and you just said it, usability, privacy. Wow, it's so simple, but it's fantastic.
I mean, it's so simple, but just hasn't been done. Again, even cybersecurity, right? So much of that is not usable to figure out how to do it, and that's where sort of they overlap in the data protection area. But those industries, they really haven't, on the technology side, haven't focused on usability a ton, because they've been focusing more on the technology and not. Again, when you continue to treat the human as the weakest link, it means that you're not creating solutions for them.
Andre's favorite quote for the user, the person.
But I say is person, is people, is not user, because user is very far. And
that's awesome.
I agree, and I think even just like the whole framing of that issue of the user as the weakest link, every aspect of it is wrong, but it's been dominant in the industry. It's basically been one of the guiding practices. And so we're finally at a point, though, where, I mean, I'm a social scientist, and 5 years ago, everyone was asking me, well, why is a social scientist working in security and privacy? And now no one asks it. So I think we're finally at a point where the industry is understanding that, okay, that there are humans that touch our technology, and perhaps we should make it usable.
Isn't that funny?
Totally agree.
So. Isn't that funny? That's hilarious. So Andrea, we're almost done here. We started the program with referencing a document that's 72 years old. That to me is incredible. So we've been dealing with privacy for many, many years, and human rights, because that document had to be created. Human rights and privacy, Article 12 of the UN Human Rights. We're still talking about that stuff right now in the digital world. It's basically an ongoing battle, something that is going to be with us for many, many years.
It is, and I think it's important to think about a little bit of the context and background that the original declaration was following one of the worst genocides in history. And so to basically protect and preserve aspects of human rights, one of which is privacy. And what we're seeing today, we're seeing a growth of violations of human rights that are empowered through technology. And so we're seeing technology being, technology is at dual use, right? So it can be used for good to help all of us communicate and stay in touch and build communities. It also can be used for the worse, for surveillance and human rights violations and for tracking people, and all sorts of malicious activity. And so we're seeing technology-enabled human rights violations unfortunately continue to grow, and we see freedom on the internet continue to decline. And I think that's where we're starting to see more of a focus on digital rights, because it's becoming very apparent that digital rights are human rights now. And like Andre said, we're in it's a digital economy, and we're in the digital age, and we're not, and it's only going to be even more pronounced over the next few decades. And so we're at the point now, we have to absolutely take the human rights element of digital activity very, very seriously, because what we do now really does impact what trajectory we go on, which doesn't mean you can never turn around and fix it, but it just becomes harder to do so once you keep going down the wrong path.
Exactly.
And so I think it's great that we're starting to see companies pay attention to it. I think it's great that we're seeing companies start to highlight it as a basically as a market factor for them, for why to select them. Mm-hmm. And so we'll see if we continue to see some evolution in that area. I mean, I think we will. And again, absent in the U.S. at least our government doing anything in that area, it's the tech companies are the ones who decide at this point.
Exactly, yeah, because again, it's an issue that's been trying to solve by the use of technology, and so you have no way around it. And there's one last comment.
No, that I said here, that I say surveillance is a problem, because when I listen, Andrea, she said, okay, the technology have a good use and bad use, and pronounce surveillance. And remember a book that I'm reading now that is a liquid in Spanish. I don't know if this book is in English, but in Spanish it's a liquid surveillance. And the authors say that surveillance is natural for our life all the time. But I say surveillance is a bad thing, or maybe it's necessary. How do you create a balance between surveillance and the necessity of the government? Of
privacy, yeah.
And the other thing that is natural that we have to watch, observe.
Yeah, I mean, so the example I like, because I agree that some surveillance can be okay, right? So what I like, so when I think about, when we used to travel, I went to London, and there was a big sign in the cab basically saying all activity in this cab is being recorded. And as a single woman going in a strange country in a cab, like I appreciated that. Like I felt much more secure knowing that there was a video of everything to at least help protect me and my security. We also see that surveillance is helping identify really bad and malicious behavior that otherwise was not seen, especially in the U.S. I mean, that's we've seen that quite a bit with our law enforcement. So there are means for where surveillance really can help actually provide greater rights and security for people. It's when it gets abused, again, for more of a malicious intent and for government control of all behavior. That's where the regulations need to come in, though, right? And it's not going to happen on its own. And so we need to do, for all these technologies, we need to do what we can to enable the social benefits of these technologies while hindering the negative aspects of it. And that's where, again, we're going to see some countries adopt complete surveillance states, and some really try and leverage the openness of recording and videos, while at the same time putting those guardrails in there so it can't be abused. And it's hard. Like there's
a comment here, and I think this is the last thing. It's not a question, it's a comment from Luis Fernando. It's a good comment. Privacy at the end relies on approval. If a user approves to disseminate his or her data across the internet, you are good to go. Always the challenge is to provide this kind of granular approval options to the end user. User always clicks in 3 lines of paragraph, and that's it, at least for cookie privacy policy. Should be more granular, the options? Maybe yes. Are companies failing in due diligence on that aspect? Maybe. So there's a lot of things, right? Is it true that privacy relies on approval of the user?
I mean, I think so, but it requires an informed user to understand what they're approving or not approving to, and that's where it becomes very, very hard. Because on one hand, if they'll say, "Oh, do you mind if we take your location data? We're just going to use it for your Yelp notification." Well, if it turns out that they're actually sharing it with all these third parties that then use it to target you, and so that's there needs to be both the trust in what they're saying, how they're using it, and then also just making the user, enabling the user, or the human at the end, understand what's being used for that. And if we get to a point where the humans do understand exactly what's going on, and then they can approve it, then I think absolutely. And so privacy does require interaction with all of us to either decide to not have that privacy or to maintain it.
Yeah, and that reminded me, we're using Zoom for this thing, and it reminded me when Zoom in March on the COVID, that everything was going to China, and again, it's like, but you said it was encrypted. Well, what we meant was this. Yeah, okay, but all your servers are in China. You're a Chinese company. Well, yeah, for some data it goes to China. What? We didn't know that. We didn't approve that. Yes, it's in paragraph XXX on page 33 of 300 pages that you clicked yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's such a great example. And then I would almost say in Zoom's defense, they actually have taken good steps to address it in a very quick way at a time when I can guarantee their product roadmap did not include the scaling to the level that it has had to scale.
Exactly.
So,
but again, it goes back to my question, right? I mean, the before, right? It's there's nothing you can do. I mean, you have a choice. Don't use it.
Yeah, well, and that's where there was a lot, again, early more in March and April, of those tables comparing the teleconference platforms and what they were doing with your data.
Yeah.
So, which again highlights to me that people care about that, right?
Yes.
Like, a couple of years ago, that would not have been a concern, and now it is. So I think
exactly.
Now it is.
Exactly.
The fact that parents didn't want their kids who were doing classwork over Zoom to have their kids' data stolen, it became more human to them.
I had my 8-year-old daughter, telling me that she's not allowed to use TikTok anymore because it steals her data. I was
did your heart grow warm?
Nice. I was like, okay, we're going to leave that conversation right there. Fantastic. Win, win, win. So, Andrea, thank you so much as always. Andres, I told you, te lo dije, Andrea is incredible. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Any questions that anyone has about geopolitics, about human rights, privacy, Andrea Little Limbago, she's always writing. I don't know, how many papers do you write a day? Like 50? I see you on LinkedIn all the time.
I don't know that, but you write a lot.
My God. Yeah, look in LinkedIn. She's always sharing on LinkedIn. Keep an eye out for her. Follow her on LinkedIn. She's a wealth of source. It's incredible. Incredible. So, Andrea, thank you so much for being with us. And
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a good conversation and the kind words. I appreciate it.
Y al resto, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Ojalá les haya gustado el
experimento.
El experimento. Y si por favor envíen un mensaje rojas@tacticaledge.co y me avisen si les gustó para seguir haciendo eso, porque tenemos acceso a muchas otras personas del mismo nivel calibre de Andrea. Así que gracias a todos. Andrea, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you in Santa Marta next year.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yes, of course.
See you later.
Bye.
See you.